Hello again everybody, and another one in my series of talks about buildings, and this one is about a very interesting archaeological site in Rome. One of the most multifaceted buildings of all in Rome is the church of the Basilica of San Clemente. You enter this from a rather unprepossessing side street not far from the Colosseum, and you enter into a series of other worlds. The interior of the church is remarkable, quite spectacular, and the upper level is famous particularly for its mosaics and frescoes in the Chapel of St. Catherine of Alexandria by a painter called Masolino, but also the apsidal mosaics. Now these are absolutely spectacular, and they symbolise all sorts of things to do with basic beliefs to do with Christianity. They date back to the 12th century. And they're rich in this Christian symbolism with the crucifixion on there. There's doves representing the apostles. There are deer representing those seeking baptism with the water of life through those purifying waters. In front of the altar there's a schola cantorum. It's a very unusual thing. It's one of the oldest sets of choir stalls anywhere. Schola cantorum means the school of singers in Latin, and this is some architecture which was incorporated into the 12th century church from the much earlier church, perhaps dating back to the 6th century. So when you stand at the gates to the choir there, the Schola cantorum, you really start to feel that you are in the steps of ancient tradition. Also on the same level, although not quite as ancient, is a panel commemorating a Yorkshire Christian and his pilgrimages to Rome. He actually came from Huddersfield. Towards the back of the church you descend a set of stairs, and you then are walking down through history to a much earlier time. You're going down to a level, the original church of San Clemente, which goes back at least to the 4th century. It's mentioned by St. Jerome. It was the site of various councils and meetings in the 5th and 6th century, all of which are recorded, and that lasted until the late 10th, early 11th century, when it was wrecked deliberately. It was one of the sackings of Rome by a man called Roberto Guiscard. There are frescoes at that level relating to the life of St. Clement and his evangelism to the Crimea, south of Russia, and his drowning by being attached to an anchor and thrown into the sea. There's also frescoes relating to the life of St. Cyril and St. Methodius. Now St. Cyril is important because he was the one who evangelized Russia for the Christian church, and he took with him the idea of the Greek alphabet and adapted it, and that became the so-called Cyrillic alphabet, named after St. Cyril, which is the Russian alphabet. So really it's a variant on medieval Greek. There's another set of stairs which go down from that 4th century level, which go down to the earliest level of occupation. And these go back to the level of the 1st century AD. To the time of Domitian, and to a house which probably belonged to a man called Flavius Clemens, who was a cousin of Domitian, of the Emperor Domitian, the butcherous Emperor Domitian, and he was also a consul. Saint Clement may well have been his freedman, which is where he gets his name from. Freedmen often took on the name of one of the names of their former masters, and that may have been the case in the case of St. Clement, who from his some very humble origins rose to become the 4th of the popes of the church. He then was sent, or went on a mission to the far edges of the empire, and as I said earlier, he met a somewhat grim end in the Crimea. That house was built on the foundations, or the foundations of that house were built on foundations of earlier buildings, and it had also been part of Nero's Golden House. So this site really does have quite a history. Also, more or less on the same level, in a different part of what was that house, is one of the best preserved Mithraic temples of all. Now, the cult of Mithras originated in Persia. It's a very odd cult altogether, and the set of beliefs are slightly, they're odd to say the least, and involve in varying points the slaying of a bull, the stinging of the bull's testicles by a scorpion, and there's also various things to do with grades of membership of each Mithras temple. It's very hierarchical and was very popular in the army, particularly in the 2nd and 3rd century, from which the Mithraic temple dates. You find Mithraic temples all over the empire. There's one on Hadrian's Wall at a place called Caraba, out in the wilds of Northumberland. There are a number in Rome. There's one under the Church of Santa Prisca on the Aventine Hill. There's one in London underneath the Bloomberg building. It's a fantastic thing if you can visit that. They've done a really good job on that. There's a large number. There's I think 7 Mithraic temples known in the harbour port of Ostia, and some of those you can walk in and as if you were there in the 1st or 2nd century AD. So it's a really remarkable building altogether, or a remarkable site, the Basilica of San Clemente. The cult of Mithras continued right throughout up to the end of the empire, and in the late 4th century was suppressed, perhaps 392, 393, suppressed by the church as being a pagan cult, although there's some evidence that the Temple of Mithras underneath the Basilica of San Clemente actually continued in use until well after that. So the whole building goes back through time. You start at modern street level. You go back to the 12th century. You go down to the 6th century choir stalls. You then go down to the 4th century church, to the 2nd or 3rd century Mithras temple, and then down to the 1st century house. So the people working back up again through time. So you start off with St. Clement, then through St. Cyril. In the upper church you get to the frescoes of Massolino, and then you get to the pilgrim from Huddersfield, and then it comes back to you, the pilgrim to Rome, standing there in the church of fascinating San Clemente.